Connor watches his old man die. It's a painful death, and Pa is full of the morphine. His face rests shallow like his breathing, and red lines of an abused life thread their way across his nose and cheeks. His hair, what is left of it after the treatments, is gray and thin. The hair resembles the rest of him, which is, Connor is grateful for this, covered in a sheet. Oxygen tubes feed Pa air his lungs can't take in on their own anymore. A heart monitor blips slowly, and a nurse's shoes squeak on the tile outside the room. A sour smell overrides the reek of disinfectant. Connor meditates on the fading life in front of him, and he tries to sit still in the old man's presence. Pa's not that old, 69 last March, but his body has been beaten on a stormy sea for too many seasons, and a boneyard scuttle would be a mercy. So Connor waits. Mother will not be coming. She and Pa haven't spoken in nearly 20 years. Connor isn't sure where she's living or if she's even still alive. He takes Pa's hand in his. The old man's hands are the same, with long fingers and stony knuckles. For strength in a good brawl, not easily broken. Connor knows the hand too well. He holds it gently. Pa stirs, and Connor quickly lets the hand go. The old man's eyes open. They're glassy, nearly gazing at the mystery that comes with a last breath. Still, his father's eyes can bore into Connor, and Connor does not look away. He will never look away. I was dreaming of birds, his father says. The voice is a loud whisper. What kind of birds, Pa? The little fat ones with the yellow and red on the chest, his old man says. His eyes move back and forth as he accesses something within himself, like the ones that would live and sing in our hedges during the summers. I remember. You do, don't you? How are you feeling today, Pa? Like I'm dying. Connor chuckles, and his father wheezes a laugh that ends in a small coughing and choking fit. The heart monitor blips speed up. Pa's face flushes at the effort, and he almost looks a bit better. Pray for a heart attack, boy, his father says. His voice has a phlegmy rasp that will not clear. Connor wants to tell his father to clear his throat, but his father does it on his own. A heart attack is clean, quick. Cancer is a fight you don't want. Have you been eating? There's no point. Connor nods. Why aren't you at work, his Pa asks. Don't you have some hostile takeover of business to orchestrate? The world of high finance can do just fine without me for a while. Those hedges, they would get so green in the summers, wouldn't they? Connor tries to turn the conversation again. Are you in pain? His father holds up the little blue button that allows him to pump his own morphine. Not with this. Connor wants to take the button from his father and give it a couple of pumps. Then his father's eyes would lose focus, and his last word would drift off before unconsciousness. Connor would be left alone again to pick words from a long story of thoughts he wants to say to his Pa. None of the words fits a feeling running through him. Those hedges were so thick, Pa says. Connor sighs and says, yes, they were. Impossible to see the other side. Impossible. His father's gaze does not waver. He stares, and Connor focuses on the black insides of those eyes, wide from the morphine. His gaze is as steady as Pa's. I'm dying, his father says. It's been more than 30 years. You can tell me now. Just the truth, boy. The sky outside lit up enough for Connor to see blue, purple, red, orange. Birds sang sweet in the hedges. He jumped out of bed, threw on shorts and a t-shirt, and rubbed up steps to the attic. He hit the boards along the edge of the wall, felt the sandpaper texture of the wallpaper. His steps were soft, like a ghost would do, to keep from waking his old man. He wouldn't have awakened from the booze stupor even if Connor dropped a load of silverware in the disposal. But it was best to be sure. The sweet foulness of Pa's booze breath drifted stale in the house. It was always like that on the weekends. During the week, Pa worked at the factory, pumping out car bumpers by the hundreds. Ma was away on her nervous system cleanse upstate with her sister, Connor's Aunt Margie, who never stopped talking even when she slept. So most of the time, that summer, Connor lived alone. He liked that. In the dusty, forgotten attic, Connor opened the cloudy window. The smell of wet grass and smog filled the room. The sounds of the city hummed like TV static. He breathed deep and watched the flutter of finches or sparrows he didn't really know in the hedges at the edge of the property. The hedges, thick and lush, stood twice as tall as he was. The Farrells lived next door on the other side of the hedges, but they were gone for the summer. Their house was a rusty stucco two-story that always seemed a bright spot in the neighborhood. They didn't have children, just 2 hound dogs. The dogs never stopped barking when they were let outside. They were away, too, at some kennel downtown. A 5-gallon paint can rested under the window. Heavy, he'd lugged it 2 blocks from the house where he'd stolen it. The weight was more than he could carry, but he could wrestle it into a rusty wagon he no longer used. He made the effort in the early morning the day before, just before dawn when the newspapers came. He didn't know the people who lived there, so he figured they wouldn't miss it. The can sat on the porch and begged to be his for a good week before he took it. Out of curiosity, he had looked inside, and it was then he knew he had to have it. He got the can home and up into the attic without his pa seeing, another exercise in strength and focus he barely had. He bent down and opened the lid. He marveled at the number of marbles, cat's eyes, boobies, ball bearings, yellow jackets, wasps, crystals, in their hundreds, blue, yellow, red, orange, silver. He knew how he was going to use them. Connor grabbed the wrist rocket from under an old dining room table stashed in the attic. He checked the bands of the slingshot, felt the cold metal, rubbed his thumb along the leather part that would hold a rock or a marble. It was so pretty that when he saw it at Joey's house, he had to have it. Joey, who was 2 years older, was pretty stupid, and when he wasn't looking, Connor had thrown it out the window to be picked up later on his way back home. Joey would probably miss it, and Connor would help him look. After all, they were friends. Connor pulled the rubber tubes as far back as he could. They did not snap. He grabbed a marble, a blue crystal, and set it in the leather holder. He pulled the rubber back to his cheek and zeroed in on the birds fluttering in the hedges. He strained. The distance was pretty far, maybe 50 of his steps, and if he hit anything, it would be a heck of a shot. Maybe, just maybe. He focused on one particularly fat bird with a yellow and red breast and fired. Even though he'd fired it before, Connor's eyes still went wide with the violent power of the slingshot. The marble missed by a mile, and the hedge rustled slightly to the left of the bird. About a dozen birds took flight. The light grew better, and he waited patiently for the birds to return. He went through a hunter's quiet all morning, shooting, missing, waiting, repeating. After dozens of shots, maybe more, his arm tired, and he heard his pa coming awake. "Connor!" He stuffed the wrist rocket under the table and out of sight. He pinched the lid back on the painter's can and hustled downstairs. "Yeah, Pa!" His father stood in the kitchen in his underwear and a tank top. He was pale, sweating, and his gray streaked hair stood up from his head like he'd been shocked. He squinted at Connor. His eyes were puffy, bloodshot, and glassy. Dead. "You been taking money out of my wallet, boy?" Sneaking his father's cigarettes was a safe bet. Father never seemed to miss them. Sneaking money felt different. Before he'd done it, Connor weighed whether he should pinch cash from Pa's wallet. But he figured it was worth it. So Connor had, but no way he was going to admit it. Hell no. He would rather stick his hand in a disposal and have it turned on. "No, sir. Don't lie to me. I'm not." The predictable dance began, but Connor had already learned the steps well. The questions, the slaps to the side of the head, the weight. "This will go easier on you if you tell the truth." Connor knew that to be not true. He kept his mouth shut, and the hours passed on the stool as always. Connor pissed himself, but that was all right. He would change when it was over, and it would always be over eventually. "I know you're lying, and you know I know you're lying." Hungry, thirsty, his ass sore from sitting on a stool, Connor's mind eventually left his body. It had happened before. His old man was good at making it happen. He found his way into a hallway. A door opened, and he saw from a far place the beet red of his father's face. Felt the spit from his mouth land on the face of a boy with black hair and black eyes, trying desperately to sit straight on a stool in the kitchen. He knew that boy was him, and he watched the boy, thin, take a smack to the head and felt blue ice along the contours of his jaw. The boy put a hand to his face and confidently, quietly said to his father, "I didn't take your money." The words vibrated in the back of Connor's throat as he watched the scene through the doorway. The hall smelled of cinnamon, and he felt peach fuzz when he touched the sunburst walls. Pa had a bottle, and the amber liquid glinted with the setting sunlight coming through the kitchen window. Connor watched the boy's eyelids droop. He felt sleepy and wished for the soft hug of his bed. "Just tell me you took it, and this can be over." "I can't," the boy said. And his father smiled and gave the boy a hug. Connor felt the touch and floated through the doorway back to the boy, back to himself. He smelled his father's sweat, cigarettes, Old Spice, the liquor. "You may be a lying thief, but you don't break, boy," his father said. He squeezed tighter, and Connor found himself hugging his father back. "Now get your sorry ass out of here before I beat you to death." Connor got off the stool and worried his legs wouldn't hold him up to help him leave the kitchen. They wobbled, but they worked. Connor felt the wood of the floor under his feet. His joints ached, and the side of his head burned. He thought of fluttering birds. Every morning that summer, when the sun was just coming up over the city smog, Connor would steal into the attic and fire marbles at the birds. He shot again and again, but he was never able to hit even one. He didn't care. When every last marble was gone from the can, he took the wrist rocket back to Joey. He put it under Joey's bunk bed and pretended to find it. Joey smiled like it was Christmas. Connor felt good about that. Walking home from Joey's house one day in early September, Connor noticed the police cars in front of the Farrell's place. He passed and heard the squawk of police radios. He waited around while officers in uniform and some in suits walked along the hedges, stooped every once in a while to pick up something and put it in a paper sack. Mr. Farrell, tanned, in shorts, with his thick glasses and buzz cut, was talking with a man in a dark suit, white shirt, black tie. The man in the dark suit wrote in a little notebook. Mr. Farrell's face was a frown, and when he spotted Connor, his face frowned deeper. He said something to the man in the suit and nodded toward Connor. Connor put his head down and started walking towards his house. "Hey, kid." Connor tried to ignore the voice and made sure to keep his speed slow, no hurrying. "I'm talking to you, kid." Connor turned around and the man in the suit approached him. He was younger than Connor's pa, and he had black hair. There was no gray. His teeth were white and straight when he smiled. "Yes, sir? Do you mind if I ask you some questions?" Connor put his hands in his jean pockets and shrugged. "You live around here?" The man's gaze bored into Connor just like his pa would do. Connor stared right back, not blinking like he knew he had to do. Connor nodded. "I'm Detective Lazarwicki from the police department." "Pleased to meet you, sir. My name's Connor." Connor put out his hand. The detective grinned a little and put his hand out. They shook, and Connor made sure to grip tight like his pa had taught. "Same here, Connor." The officer looked behind him. "You know the Farrells?" "Yes, sir," Connor said. "They've been away on vacation. They have 2 dogs." "That's right," the officer said. He leaned over and stared into Connor again. "You know why we're here?" "No, sir." "Come with me," he said. Connor followed. They walked up the drive along the hedge line. Connor heard birds singing and tried to spot them hiding in the hedge. He looked at the detective's feet and saw a marble, a cat's eye. Soon he saw dozens of marbles, hundreds of them scattered across the drive. And then he looked to the house on the other side of the drive. Little holes dotted the entire side of the stucco house, like a woodpecker had been working on it for months. Windows were cracked, little holes perfectly bored through the glass. It was like somebody took a machine gun to the side of the house. In some places, the stucco had come loose in chunks. Connor understood why the police were there. "You know anything about this?" "No, sir." He kept his face relaxed, just like with Pa. He would not look away from the detective's eyes. "Your parents home?" "My pa is," Connor said. "I'd like to speak with him." "What you say you go introduce me?" "Yes, sir." So he did. Pa was drunk and was surly towards the detective, but he answered the questions. Every once in a while he glared at Connor, and Connor looked back and put his best face of, "It wasn't me, Pa." The question began, but the detective did not use slaps or threaten to beat Connor until he was dead. It was a much easier dance. He put Connor on the sofa in the living room. The sofa was comfortable, and Connor was happy not to be sitting on a stool. He watched the detective's face get angrier and angrier each time Connor denied destroying the Farrell's wall on the other side of the hedge. He took Connor outside, showed him trajectories the marbles had to take, which Connor was finally able to understand after he explained it a second time. I didn't do it. I know you did it, kid. There's no other answer. And you know I know you did it. Just come clean. It'll be for the best. It'll be easier for you. Connor knew that was not true, and he kept his mouth shut while his pa hovered at a safe distance, his face a stone. Eventually, the detective and Pa got into an argument. Mr. Farrell showed up. Then Pa and Mr. Farrell got into an argument. Pa threatened to shoot Mr. Farrell unless he got off his property, then they were all three arguing. If my boy said he didn't do it, he didn't do it, Connor's Pa said with finality. Everybody left as it started to get dark, and Pa told Connor to go up to his room. Later that night, Pa had a talk with him. Did you do it? No, sir. If you tell the truth, I won't be mad. It wasn't me, Pa. His Pa smiled, and that was the end of it. The police tried a couple of times to get Connor to trip up. They even brought up fingerprints, but Connor held firm, and nobody ever took his fingerprints like threatened. The Farrells never spoke to him again, and he never spoke to the Farrells again. The damage to the house was repaired. Life went on. Connor's father winces, then he settles back. You never had any idea there was something on the other side of those hedges, did you? I have no idea what you mean, Pa. The Farrells told everybody that they paid $10,000 to have the damage repaired, his father said, his voice still a whisper. That was what, 1976? Probably would be more than 50 or 60 grand in today's dollars, maybe more. The cops caught somebody. They lock gazes. Connor does not look away. Joey, his Pa says, that kid was stupider than a bag of rocks. He may have been caught breaking windows with that slingshot, but I know and you know I know. Connor says nothing and does not look away from his father's searching gaze. I'm dying, boy. A last wish for a dying man. Come on. What do you say? Connor opens his mouth. His father tries to lean in a bit. It wasn't me, Pa. A quiet sadness steals over his father's face with a blink of an eye. Then, the old man smiles. You may be a liar and a thief, but you never break. I'm proud of you, son. He coughs and winces again. The heart monitor sound gets faster. He yells out a bit before cutting it off and hitting the little blue button in his hand. Soon his eyes lose focus and the gaze is broken. He sinks deeper into the bed and closes his eyes. The heart monitor slows again. Meditating on his father's face, Connor searches a long story of thoughts on what he wants to say to him. 3 words finally float to the surface that fit the feeling running through him. He gets up, leans over his father, and whispers those words into his ear. He kisses his father on the forehead and straightens. He looks at the quiet figure on the bed and walks from the room.